Hey there everybody, I wanted to share a couple ideas that I learned from Jack Antonoff. He's a producer and singer, I love him as a singer, of the Bleachers, and he's also produced Taylor Swift, Lorde, St. Vincent. These are some facts that I learned from Jack Antonoff, not by actually working with him, but by reading this great article in Sound on Sound magazine. So let's start with a picture of Jack Antonoff. Here he is, and his girlfriend is Lena Dunham of HBO's Girls. I saw Jack Antonoff singing on one of the late night TV shows, and I thought he was just great. Very interesting voice. I really liked his voice. Wonderful stage presence, and also, actually, before he sang, he just had the most hilarious, it was Jimmy Fallon, most hilarious conversation with Jimmy Fallon about the hardships of being a musician that any musician can really relate to. So then I just, it was one of those weird universe things, because as soon as I see that, then the next thing I do is I pick up this magazine, Sound on Sound, that I had gotten at the NAMM show. He is a really cool experimenter, and I just thought that there's a lot of great things in here. He is not a fan of studios in terms of the way studios can sort of crush you into conformity. He's such an experimenter. He loves to sort of twist and turn knobs without really knowing what they do, which is an interesting and refreshing perspective. It says here, his studio is very much his comfort zone, right down to the fact that the walls have the same wallpaper design he had in his childhood bedroom. He says, I like to have shit around that reminds me of me. One thing I didn't like about going to commercial studios is I'd be in a space where the walls didn't know me, whereas when you're home, all your stuff keeps you in you. But he also later talks about, sometimes you need to get out and explore something new. But even when he gets out, it sounds like he sort of really follows his own instinct into finding the right room, and then sometimes he won't even record in the official recording room, but rather sort of create a room in a studio where he sort of drags in the equipment. Again, this is me reading this article, so that's based on what I've just read. Point number one would just be the sense of experimentation and how much he loves to create soundscapes. The second point I think is really interesting. He talks about his engineer, Laura Sisk, being the unsung hero, and he says that she's been in studios with him forever. She's worked on all his records, and she is the one who built his studio room in his house in Brooklyn. And I'm jealous of that, because the times that I have had that kind of a relationship with an engineer, it's really marvelous, and I would love to have that again. So I think it's great that he's got that. He kind of talks about making music at home, and he always made music at home. First demo was in somebody's house where one person was in the kitchen, one person was in the bathroom. And again, I think it's just going back to, it's funny that here are these people at the top of their game making huge chart-busting hits, and they're talking about getting this natural sound. And even though I don't necessarily agree with, I don't always agree with the song structures. I love his lyrics, I love his voice, and I love the soundscapes. I just wish there were more chords. I get a little tired of the monotony, the harmonic monotony of a lot of today's music. So it's like if he could meet up with Dirty Loops, I would think I would be happy, because Dirty Loops provides a lot of the chordal movement that I like to hear. So let's move on to another point. Oh, and here's a picture of his engineer, Laura Sisk. His home studio was built by the Walter Storick Design Group, which is the same company that designed Jungle City Studios. He says it's treated similar to Jungle City with those pegged walls. And then he's got SCM45A Pro ATC monitors, and he's got everything up. So everything has a Pro Tools input, and it's ready to go. And again, that's so important. I don't have that, but that would be amazing, right? Is just be ready to go. Certainly I have my acoustic instruments are ready to go, but having studio stuff ready to go, not even close. That's the problem, is every time I want to record something, I have to reinvent the wheel, and it's just hours of frustration. Then he talks a little bit about the various types of gear that he has, and preamps and all that, and you can see him sitting and surrounded by all of his gear. But here's another interesting point. He says, I'm really into bouncing and printing things. If I think something's interesting, I print it. And then if I really, really want to go back, it's somewhere in an old session. But I never do, and I don't like having all the plugins still there. The next morning, I want to pick up where I left off. I don't want to be tweaking reverb forever, because if it sounds good, it sounds good. So I think that's just interesting that he tends to get something that he likes and then just go with it and print it. He's a great believer in creating a sound world for each album he works on. And each sound world is record specific, certain synths or combinations of sounds that are featured more. On St. Vincent's Mass Seduction, he used a lot of the Moog Model D and Voyager, and he got really involved in getting things off the Moog and recording a lot of Mellotron strings, then putting real strings on top of it. I split that out so you have a lot of interesting panning going on, where maybe the mellotron strings are on the left and the real strings are on the right. It created a very eerie feeling, or doubling the low-end Moog parts with the real bass, so you have a push and pull of a live instrument and a synth. I mean, that's certainly something that I've done a ton of, but I like that approach. This, to me, is very interesting, and it's not something that I've ever done, but it's been suggested to me in various studios, and I think with the right producer, it could make sense. He says, the control room is the best live room. Here's what they say here. Always concerned to protect the intimacy of his recordings, Jack Antonoff records vocals with artists in the control room. I hate the vocal booth, he says. It's a terrible idea to put someone in a little box. This is true. Also, nothing ever sounds better than the control room unless you have bad isolation with all your gear and stuff. But if you have a quiet control room, it's the best sounding room. And so, like I said, I've been to studios where I've said, okay, what's the best spot for the singer? And they've said, you can record in the control room. But since I never worked with an engineer who liked that, I've never done it. He mentions some interesting in-the-box vocal processing, and he uses something called the Waves Doubler, and I actually just looked that up, and it's on sale. So I'm going to explore that, because I'm always wondering, I would love, push button, this makes your vocals sound better. But I love what he says here. He says it's so important to have a sense of freshness and spontaneity in the vocals, and an inspired take is so much more important than a correctly recorded take. So many times I go back to the rough where there's bleed. When you're just putting it down to get the idea, it's often the best takes. He also likes to grab moments of reverb and grab hits of reverb from a vocal, like the end of a word, just the ah of the reverb, and then printing it and using it almost like an instrument, so it sounds really unique. And that's something that I noticed at NAMM, just such a huge trend of making your own sounds. Again, not a skill that I feel that I necessarily have, but I think it's so interesting that that's so big right now with the reemergence of synths. This one is great for all of us who don't have unlimited budgets. He says, with all of the choice that he has, it's inevitable that some of his gear goes entirely unused. It's interesting the stuff that you really use and the stuff that you don't, he says. I have a little area of keyboards, old Casios and a Yamaha DX700 and a small cheap realistic ConcertMate MG1. Those I never use, and they're so cool. It's nothing to do with cost or quality. Some of the crappiest stuff I use over and over again. Obviously, when you're at this level of writing hits, you have to worry about getting hacked and getting your stuff leaked, and apparently that happened to Madonna, and so he always keeps his studio computer offline, and he never works on anyone's drives but his own. To close it out, he says, the cosmic joke is about writing and recording is that you can wake up, you can do something for 8 months, and then you wake up in the morning, get in the shower, and hum a melody that was better than anything that you just did. That's just it. You have to be ready to follow it. You don't want to know when it's going to come or how it's going to come. You're just powerless, and I love that. For the albums that he recently worked on. I hope you find that inspiring. What are some sort of iconoclastic studio or recording ideas or producer ideas that you've come across, and did they work for you? Did they motivate you? Did you try something different because of it? Thanks for watching and commenting and subscribing and sharing. Bye.